Coachella Valley questions answered. Lessons from the pandemic. Here's Peter Doubt.
Good evening, everybody. 1 year ago, we brought together city leaders from across the Coachella Valley to get a closer look at the impact the pandemic was beginning to have on each city and predictions for how it would affect Valley residents. Tonight, we've done it again, but this time, with the end of the pandemic within reach, we'll be looking back with our 9 mayors to find out exactly how the pandemic impacted our cities and the important lessons learned. So let's begin by introducing each of our mayors. We have Palm Springs Mayor Christy Holstage, Cathedral City Mayor Raymond Gregory, Desert Hot Springs Mayor Scott Mattis, Rancho Mirage Mayor Ted Weil, Palm Desert Mayor Kathleen Kelly, Indian Wells Mayor Richard Balacco, Laquinta Mayor Linda Evans, Indio Mayor Elaine Holmes, and Coachella Mayor Stephen Hernandez. Thank you all for being here. All right, I'd like to start by asking each of you about the economic fallout from the pandemic. Obviously, over the past year, many non-essential businesses were forced to close, major tourism events were canceled, and our cities dealt with serious financial challenges. Beginning with Palm Springs Mayor Christy Holstage, last year your city was one of the first to declare a fiscal emergency. Looking back, exactly how much did the pandemic end up costing your city, what was done about it, and how is Palm Springs doing now?
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having us. It's clear that Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley were hit hard because of the pandemic and the financial impacts. We're so reliant on our tourism economy. So overall, it was probably $50 million over the 2 fiscal years that we were impacted. But we took a really proactive approach and a conservative approach in budgeting. We moved to a rolling budget model because we couldn't predict 3 months out, 6 months out. We didn't know what tourism was going to look like. So we took an approach right away to make sure that if it was the worst case scenario, we would be protected, and then going month by month to assess the damage and also, all the services that we need to continue to provide for our residents, making sure we fund those.
Moving east to Cathedral City, Mayor Raymond Gregory, your city also declared a fiscal emergency. Can you tell us how much the pandemic cost your city, what was done about it, and how are things now?
Yes, Peter, thank you so much. Well, I can't tell you the whole cost because unfortunately, the shortfalls continue. As has been shared, it was very difficult to predict. We haven't seen this type of event happen before. So Cathedral City was very proactive at the beginning, and we actually made some substantial cuts, about $8.3 million out of our budget, and we hoped that would be enough. It looked like it was so unknown that it might not be enough. There might have just been the first round, but fortunately, sales tax in particular did not necessarily take the hit that we anticipated it did. TOT certainly took a hit, and our cannabis revenue has also taken a big hit. But it looks like at this point our loss is about $7 million. So we were a little bit over, but we wanted to make sure that we had cut enough. And now it looks like we may be able to ease back on some of those cuts.
All right, same questions now to Desert Hot Springs Mayor Scott Mattis. Scott.
Thank you, Peter, for having us again. Desert Hot Springs has fared well, I would say. TOT isn't a huge revenue producer for us. So our city over the last year saw about a $345,000 deficit, which comparably is pretty good to other cities. The cannabis industry was strong for us during this time as an essential business. We continued to produce in those industry area. So for Desert Hot Springs being a working community, we fared well.
Rancho Mirage Mayor Ted Weil.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we were affected economically like all the cities. In 2019-20, our fiscal budget was affected by $4.4 million, the following year by $5.5 million, a total of $10 million less revenue between TOT and sales tax. Fortunately, we had a reserve of $72 million, and we used 10 of it to make up for that shortfall. So we felt it, but we have adjusted and we've made the necessary changes to go forward. And I'm just couldn't be more pleased with the resiliency of our city and the resiliency of our residents.
Moving on now to Palm Desert Mayor Kathleen Kelly.
Thank you, Peter. With 60% of our revenue coming from sales tax and hotel tax in a typical year, we expected a deficit in revenue of approximately $10 million. So we cut expenses as much as possible, frankly, in ways that are not sustainable long-term, but we were also able to tap reserves and help all of our businesses with more than $3 million so that they were able to survive the stresses of this pandemic, and as a consequence, benefit as guests have started to return to the valley. So like Cathedral City, we're currently anticipating the revenue miss will be about $7 million rather than the $10 million first thought.
Okay, let's now hear from Indian Wells Mayor Richard Balacco.
Well, thank you for having us. We went from a projected surplus in the general fund of 2.7 million to a deficit of 2.2 million. We reduced and worked around things. We didn't reduce any public safety, or did we use any of our reserves at this point in time? So I think we're starting to see a slow recovery here. And hopefully as we move ahead, we'll recover that. Of course, the big hit in Indian Wells, which for everyone was the music festivals, but in particular the tennis tournament, because we get an admissions tax there. It's pretty significant. So we didn't have that. So that's it going forward.
Moving on to Laquinta Mayor Linda Evans.
Thank you, Peter, and it's good to be back. I looked back at last year's program, and it was just about a year ago that we were reporting in City of Laquinta projected $7 million loss in revenue, primarily because of sales tax and hotel tax. We did manage to reduce expenses like our sister cities and looked at a conservative budget going forward, but I'm very happy to report that right now we're sitting at an $8.6 million surplus in our budget, and that is, number one, tracked separately with Measure G money, our separate sales tax, which is about 5.5 million, and then a combination of regular sales tax and the TOT from short-term rentals of about 3.1 million. So we really bounced back. We saw a lot of people doing home improvements, definitely supporting local businesses. We were able to refund the $2 million that we pulled from our reserves for the small business program. We've also refunded our capital reserves and the reserves we pulled to balance last year's budget. So La Quinta's fairly strong at this point. We're very pleased at the recovery efforts we've made collectively.
All right, now let's hear from Indio Mayor Elaine Holmes.
Hey, thank you, Peter. Well, last year was a surprise to everyone, and the city of India was really able to lean in. There were no staff reductions during this particular period in time. Of course, the concerts are about a $3.5 million loss for us, and overall, we were looking at about $12 million in losses. However, we did not have to dip into our reserves. We did have the Measure X, which is our sales tax measure, and we were able to dip into that by about $9 million so that we could keep everything connected. There were no reductions in staff, no reductions in public safety or in any other part of the community. So we were very, very happy and very pleased with that. Also, sales tax, particularly with our auto dealers, helped keep us afloat in a much larger way than we anticipated. So we're on the road to recovery at this point, looking back over the last year in ways in which we were able to keep going and keep all the services we provide to our community going.
And Coachella Mayor Stephen Hernandez.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for hosting us once again. Last year we projected about a $500,000 hit. Again, the city of Coachella is not an economy that's based off of tourism. We're a pre-Prop 13 city, so it's a lot about property tax for us. Happy to report that we're doing extremely well. We got about $1.3 million that we expect to see in reserves and surplus for this upcoming fiscal year. So we're doing great.
Focusing now on city services and changes your city had to make. What is different now in your city compared to before the pandemic? And if your city did have to make tough choices and changes, do you anticipate those changes will continue even after the pandemic ends? Let's start again with Palm Springs Mayor Christy Holstich. Christy.
Thank you. Yes, so Palm Springs, we have such a large revenue stream with TOT and sales tax. We did see what our sister cities saw, and that actually sales tax was much higher than our projections, and vacation rentals actually became 50% of our TOT income revenue stream. So that was helpful for our city budget. We did, like I said, take a conservative approach. So we did have to freeze positions and do layoffs. However, I'm happy to announce at this last council meeting last week, we're bringing back 18 of those positions. We've already brought back a number of them earlier because we are doing that rolling budget to assess that we're doing a lot better than we ever projected with the loss of, all of these events that drive tourism in the Coachella Valley. So we're really hopeful for the future in Palm Springs. We made an effort not to cut essential services like Parks and Rec, library services, for our residents that they rely on to get through this pandemic.
Cathedral City Mayor Raymond Gregory.
Well, thank you. So we made sure that we did not cut into the public safety component of our city services in Cathedral City, but we did need to make a number of layoffs to meet our targets and kind of spread throughout, and also leave for a time some positions vacant that either had been unfilled or became vacant through attrition. But we were able to continue on with services. Of course, as many cities happened, the office is closed to all work except through appointments. And we found that we were able to push forward with our electronic and technological ways of working, which we had already started, but this was a real opportunity for us to be able to have that initiative so we could begin doing things like accepting building plans electronically, having people work from home and respond through electronic means. And we also, as a council and the senior staff, began utilizing that same technology to reach out to citizens. We periodically, monthly through most of the year, have a City Hall at Your Corner where citizens can meet with a couple of the council that rotates. We started doing that electronically. Of course, with our meetings, people were able to reach out electronically and make comments. And we found that we actually got a broader spectrum of participation in many of these meetings. So that's one silver lining of all of this, is we've all learned how to communicate electronically.
Desert Hot Springs Mayor Scott Mattis.
Thanks, Peter. Myself and the public information officer, when this first all came down, did a lot of informational social media, just making sure the public was informed on what was going on. We were very fortunate not to lose many businesses. I think over the whole time of the pandemic, we've lost 2 businesses. Our public safety and our staffing here in Desert Hot Springs, we did freeze a few positions and not hire in some other areas, but for the most part, we didn't lay off one person. And my heroes here at Desert Hot Springs are our city staff members who continue to work every day, our public works, our public safety people that continue to keep our city moving forward. So again, we've been very fortunate. Desert Hot Springs deficit was really small, and we were able to really focus on what was important for our residents and making sure they were taken care of.
Rancho Mirage Mayor Ted Weil.
Thank you, Peter, again. Yes, we reacted quickly. When the first COVID case went into Eisenhower Hospital on March 7th, 2 days later, we declared an emergency. We closed the library, City Hall, the observatory, and all events that were scheduled for the amphitheater. We reopened. We were the first to reopen our City Hall in June of 2020. We're open and still are Monday through Thursday. You do not need an appointment. Services have continued as scheduled. And I must tell you that we are looking forward to this year having some of the largest projects scheduled in the history of Rancho Mirage. We have the retreat at Porcupine Creek a 6-star spa scheduled to break ground, along with Section 31, the single largest project in the history of our city, 1,900 homes, 400 hotel rooms, and a 34-acre crystal lagoon. Point being is that optimism truly reigns, and we feel very fortunate to be in our position.
Palm Desert Mayor Kathleen Kelly.
Hats off to our employees who have made it possible to retain all city services, even as we have kept some vacancies open and deferred non-essential capital projects. Those two moves are key because they've allowed us to reset our strategy for expenditures as we come out of the pandemic. So we're reprioritizing in light of what we've learned. We'll seek to invest in broadband, which has proven so essential to the economy and quality of life. As everyone returns to the streets, we see the need for expenditures that enhance safety for bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorists. And like others, we're speeding up processes for electronic submissions and other ways of doing business with the city.
Indian Wells Mayor Richard Balacco.
We had some, like I said, impact on the general fund, but there were no layoffs on city employees. We did significantly reduce and eliminated several positions at the Indian Wells Golf Resort. That is operated by Troon under a contract with us. And so what we learned there is we couldn't provide restaurant services based on compliance. So a lot of people were laid off there. We reduced some of our maintenance on the golf course. All of those resulted in kind of new thinking on how to operate the Indian Wells Golf Resort going forward. So I think that's a plus out of the pandemic. I think some of the other things out of the pandemic that we've learned is that Zoom is a very effective tool for meetings. It reduces expense to get to meetings, reduces air pollution, a number of other things that I think you all would agree that once you got used to using Zoom, it's a great tool. And it's also rethinking our economic development plan. Although we're a very small city compared to all of you, with not many businesses, there are still many opportunities here and some undeveloped properties along 111 here in Indian Wells that we'll be rethinking how we're going to use that property going forward. Thank you.
Laquinta Mayor Linda Evans.
Thank you. When you look at the impacts and the challenges, clearly we all had to struggle with balancing a budget or working at ways to reduce costs. And, you know, hats off to our city staff as well. And our council worked very hard, not only enjoying somewhat of this state of emergency that we could execute things very quickly under our meeting, our ordinances, the executive orders that were put out. You know, the flexibility and adaptability was something that was a silver lining in order to keep things moving, and communication to our staff and residents was key. We did recognize that we need to look at diversifying that revenue stream beyond hospitality. And I know as an entire Coachella Valley, we've all talked about how to introduce new industries. You know, this was a good way to start that process and figure out what other brands we can bring in besides medical and hospitality and sales tax. But our property values increased significantly in Laquinta, and people looked at our destination as a whole in the Coachella Valley to recognize there's a better way to work and live remotely. And that's been something I think our valley has won in terms of people finding new places to live, work, and play.
Indio Mayor Elaine Holmes.
Well, this was really a shift, and it really prompted us to think about how we do business. And our employee group works so hard in terms of really stepping up with technology. It was an opportunity for us to utilize technology to meet the needs of our residents. As I mentioned before, there were no layoffs whatsoever. I think the only thing that we had to pull back on was on some of the street projects we were working on, but we had record housing permits. Our TOT really was through the roof, even to pre-pandemic, beyond pre-pandemic levels. Sales tax, again, shout out to the auto dealers who really kind of kept us afloat. And then we're starting to see the soft opening of events, and also record home prices and short-term rentals and the benefits of that. So I think really the lessons learned here for us is that we could really continue staying afloat, make things happen, utilize technology so that we could keep the city not just functioning, but moving forward. I'm really proud of everyone here because everybody did such a great job to keep us going through this crazy period where from one day to the next, we didn't know what the impacts would be.
And Coachella Mayor Steven Hernandez.
Yeah, we didn't cut any services. We sustained everything, but we just changed the delivery model. So for us, it was about remote services, electronic services, really moving to using social media platforms to communicate to our residents, looking at radio, commercial, just making sure that our residents were informed. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that we can continue to grow. We're seeing a record number of permits as well, a lot of construction going on. In the city of Coachella, we've also doubled down and somewhat used the Kenyan-ness model of investing. So we've rolled out our infrastructure plans for Avenue, Grateful Boulevard's under construction, affordable housing's under construction. So we're doing very, very well. Moving forward, we do want to see us keep some of the remote services available. We've been seeing a good response from our constituents. They are tuning into city council meetings a little bit more frequently because they can access them online and they can just call in. So we want to keep some of that going as the pandemic comes to a close.
All right. Thank you, mayors. Coming up, what are the biggest lessons each of our cities has learned during the pandemic? And are they now more prepared if and when another pandemic happens again? Stay with us for this special edition of Coachella Valley Questions Answered, Lessons from the Pandemic.